down here?
Yes, please.
Good.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to a meeting I'm having with Mr. Howard Jacobson. I think I'm right in saying that you were my very first interviewee some years ago, Howard.
You never told me that at the time. Man, you would explain quite a lot.
Now, Howard comes along today with J, which is possibly the shortest title of any novel ever written, or are there others that can lay claim to that title too?
C?
Yes. What, B?
There would be a B, yeah.
Yes, as well. Now, this was shortlisted.
It's my shortest title. Yes.
Right, indeed. And it was shortlisted, talking of short, for the Man Booker Prize last year. But of course, you won that particular prize a few years earlier already. So, did you kind of feel that you were in a sort of proper club once you won the Booker and was shortlisted?
When you win the Booker, you think, I'll no longer have to be a child wanting to win a prize, though you never admit that you want to win the prize. And the great thing about winning a prize like that is you think, it's over now. I never have to think about this. I remember saying that to my wife. What do you feel? She said, I said, it's relief. No longer do I have to worry about winning the Booker Prize. And then suddenly you find yourself with another book shortlisted and you think, this is just between ourselves. I don't normally admit it.
Don't let it go any further. Now, I have to say, Howard, when the word dystopian, which seems to be the one adjective that crops up all the time in describing the novel J, I would never have associated you with dystopic works that kind of invoke the spirit of Orwell and Aldous Huxley. So am I wrong to think that, or do you feel it's a real departure for you, a book on this
It's not my word. It's a word that was bequeathed to me. Dystopian, you know what dystopian means, it's an anti-utopian thing. And had anybody said, where are you in, what about you in dystopian novels? I would say, well, it's not my word, but all my novels have really been that. Mm-hmm. All my novels are really about, my first novel was set in Wolverhampton Polytechnic. You don't get anywhere more dystopian than that. So sort of hellish futures, which any book about a hellish future is really a book about the hellish present, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And I've only ever written about hellish presents. So really, although my publishers wanted to say this was a departure, and if it helps to sell it, and if it helps you to buy it to know it's a departure, then it's a departure. But between ourselves, it's really in the tradition of what I do. Though never before have I actually set the book literally at a future time. That's all, really. It's literally at a future time.
I mean, I know no author should be responsible for his or her blurb writer, but do the names Huxley and Orwell exert a little bit of pressure on you to kind of live up to your blurb writer's description?
Well, they're not my favourite novelists. Mm-hmm. This is the odd thing. I'm now associated with them, and if I want to be associated with other novelists, it's Jane Austen and D.H. Lawrence. Yes. There's a pairing you don't expect. But I feel I clatter between the two of those, really. And you could argue, Lawrence certainly writes novels which are dystopic. And Jane Austen, I have a lecture going around in which I kind of argue that she does too, though that stretches it a little bit. But I read both those novels when I was a teenager, the 1984, which I didn't think was a very good novel. And I still don't think is a very good novel, and he's got it wrong anyway. It's not a dictator who's going to be, we should be afraid of. It's the people. That's what's terrifying. Let the people loose. That's much more frightening than a dictator.
Dictator figure.
And Aldous Huxley probably is nearer in that it's, that our terrible future is everybody having a good time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's nearer. That's nearer to it. But they're not. Neither of those writers are writers on whom I have modelled myself, and neither of those novels, Brave New World or 1984, are novels that I have aspired to be like. But my publishers thought, throw them in the air. And so. But I mean, all these things are hostages to fortune. You say your publisher says you like somebody, and a reviewer who doesn't like you goes, in your dreams, Sonny Jim. So I don't think it's ever a good idea to, mention other writers.
So what was the sort of genesis? What was your thinking? Because I read somewhere it was suggested it was a kind of, you said you were going to write a novel without particular letters or words, and as I understand it, that was a kind of first seeding of this idea.
Years ago, when I was doing a lot of writing about Jewish subjects, I thought I'm sick of this subject, really. and I'm going to never... Someone had just published a novel without the word... What was the famous French novel that didn't have a... It was a French novel that never had the letter E in it.
That's
something.
right. By, what's the name? The author, I'm sure someone will know here. I hope so.
Yes, someone just said the right... Yes, that's it.
That's the one.
And I lightly made a joke about I'm going to write a novel without the letter J in it. That would mean I'd never have to write about Jews. Then I forgot about all that.
Yes.
And someone who reviewed it brought that up. I think it was Terry Eagleton in a review, because I'd probably said it to Terry Eagleton.
Yes,
somewhere or other. We were at university together, and once every 20 years we run into each other, and he says, "How are you doing?" And I say, "How you doing? What's happened to you, Terry? Anything happened to your career?" And I mentioned that to him, and he mentioned this and he wondered whether this was a deliberate attempt, but it wasn't. This is, I mean, people make something about the J. What does the J stand for? But you know, it's pretty obvious when you're about a page into the book. There's a people that have been apparently destroyed in some catastrophe which isn't named. It's called What Happened If It Happened, and it looks a little bit like a genocide, and apparently the people who are gone begin with a J. I wonder who they are.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's a tricky one, this.
Yes. You can all ponder this for a little while if you want 5 minutes quiet.
So how did you set about kind of assembling? Because I suppose in a way you're creating your own world, so you don't have to bother with kind of reality or authenticity too much. Whatever you say goes.
No, you do. You have to bother every bit as much as in any other form of novel. It's not different to write a novel that's set in the future to writing a novel that's set now. It's no different. The demands that you make of yourself remain the same. That you believe in the people, that you care about the people. You can't know whether anybody else will, but that you care about the people. That you are amusing yourself. You hope at the deepest level. And although it's also been said about this book that this is me giving up on comedy, it isn't. But it's a different kind of blacker, grimmer, greyer, uglier kind of comedy, if you like, because something ugly and grey and horrible has happened. But I still, wanted to go on feeling that this is funny, and people at a very deep level, at a very visceral level, people will be amused, and also people will be touched. Heartbreak's very important to me. I have to be on the edge of tears at the end of most chapters, and certainly at the end of the novel I have to be in tears. This again is not something I normally confess in the outside world, where I try and sell myself as a hard man, but I've been coming to Edinburgh for a long time and you know the truth, so I could admit to you it's very important to me to be upset when I'm writer. I am much more...
What makes you feel so emotional at that stage of...
It's love. Mm-hmm. All my novels are about love. I mean, wherever they are set, for me it's... I write about a couple. I am couple-centered. So when I say it's about love, I don't really write about much about the love parents feel for children, or children for parents, or siblings or something. I have written about siblings. It's a man and a woman. Mm-hmm. It's a couple anyway, and that's what it appears I need to write about. So whatever world I set them in, one of the things I'm asking is what kind of what are the conditions that will make for happiness?
Yeah.
What are the conditions that will make for happiness between a couple? Fulfillment, if not happiness. And what are the conditions that won't? And I always seem to end up moving towards, at the end of my novels, conditions that don't. I don't know why that is. It's my dread, I suppose. That something will... When something goes terribly wrong between a man and a woman, then something is terribly... But between the couple in the novel, then there's something wrong with the world of the novel. Mm. That's how I read Jane Austen, and that's one of the ways in which I once said, I may have been at this festival, when someone said, how do you feel about being, the English Philip Roth? And I was worn out with being called the English Philip Roth, a compliment as it is, and I said I'd rather call myself the Jewish Jane Austen. And one of the things I meant by, it was flip at the time, but it did mean something. I read her a lot and admire her a lot. And I think she is one of the most upsetting, most melancholy novelists, and most harsh, critically harsh novelists. But in her too, everything is about, can love survive in this world? Will love survive in this world of commerce, or in this, in the later novels, in this world where people are losing their faith in this society? And almost every time her answer is, no, it will not, but I'm going to make it. It's a kind of a deal that she does with the readers, but I'm going to make it. I'm going to give you a kind of very fragile fairy story on the top of the story itself. But all along we know that, they're not happy, that Anne Elliot is not going to be happy at the end of Persuasion, really. And I remove the veil. That doesn't make me harder than Jane Austen, just different. And I don't know how to play, or I can't play the fairy story that says, for the moment we're in this novel, we will pretend that there's going to be a happy ending, and I'm inclined to be unhappy. And this is a book about people lost, people who've lost their own memories, people who don't know why they're together to that degree. It's a mystery story, and people who are going to find it very difficult who search very, very hard to retain happiness but might not make it. And that's the upset that I'm talking about.
Yes, I was going to ask you about your central couple, Kevin and Aileen, or Aileen, or Aileen.
Can I just say something? We struck a bargain before we came in here.
Yes, you want to do a
You
reading?
said you were going to ask me to read something right at the beginning.
Right.
It's not as though this is the first time you've ever done this.
Well, I was getting so absorbed in what we were just talking about. No,
because that gives me an opportunity. I only say this not because I want to show off and read, but that gives me an opportunity to introduce Aileen and
Absolutely.
Kevin.
So
The other promise you broke was that there would be a lectern in here.
Well, quite. We're not doing very well so far. Can we have a lecture, please?
No, it doesn't work. It's a festival of broken promises, this.
Well,
but I'm a grown man and I can cope with this.
You've got your own copy?
And I even have my own copy,
Excellent. Well, what about a reading?
I don't think I want to do a reading. I'll do a little reading then.
Please.
A couple of things you need to know for this reading to work, that's to say if it does work. Something has happened in this novel, and it's called, and the catastrophe is never given a name. It's called What Happened If It Happened. So there's the first chapter is called The Big If. There is a big question mark over this world that we're in. Some terrible thing has happened and no one wants to say what it is. The other thing you need to know is that there's a scene very early on at the beginning when the hero, Kevin is the hero, Aileen is the heroine, and his father tells him never to use, whenever he uses a word beginning with J, he must cover his lips. So he must stifle it. So you don't use the word. So the J word is never to be used in this world. He doesn't know why, but it becomes apparent as the novel progresses that he's being brought up, at the far edges of whatever country they're in, and he's in a kind of hiding. And he meets Aileen, who's come from another part. She's come from the far north. He seems to be in the southwest of this country, which might be England and might not be England. I wasn't thinking specifically of England. I was thinking anywhere. And they've met and they've fallen for each other, but both is frightened. She's an orphan. He's been brought up very strangely by elderly parents who are both dead. And when they meet, everything is very tentative. And they've gone into this is their sort of first date, as it were, and they're in a garden. And I don't need to tell an audience as theologically and literally sophisticated as this, that when you set a scene in a garden, when you put a man and a woman in a garden, it's asking for trouble. So they're sitting in a cottage garden, and it's the cottage that Aileen is living in when she's just come down to Kevin's part of the world. It was like a children's story cottage, threatening and enchanting at the same time, the garden full of secrets. Kevin had been sitting holding hands with Aileen on broken deck chairs in the long grass, enjoying an unexpectedly warm spring afternoon. The pair of them absent-mindedly plugged into the utility console that supplied the country with soothing music and calming news, when the sight of her crossed brown legs reminded him of an old song by a long-forgotten black entertainer his father had liked listening to with the cottage blinds down. Your feet's too big. I don't know whether you know that song, but you should. On account of their innate aggressiveness, songs of that sort were no longer played on the console. Not banned, nothing was banned exactly, simply not played. Popular taste did what edict and prescription could never have done. And just as, when it came to books, people chose rags to riches memoirs, cookbooks and romances, so when it came to music, they chose ballads. Carried away by the day, Kevin began to play at an imaginary piano, and in a rudely comic voice serenade Aileen's big feet. Aileen didn't understand. It was a popular song by a jazz pianist called Fats Waller, he told her, automatically putting 2 fingers to his lips. He had to explain what jazz was. Aileen had never heard any. Jazz, too, without exactly being prescribed, wasn't played. Improvisation had fallen out of fashion. There was room for only one if in life. People wanted to be sure when a tune began exactly where it was going to end. Wit the same. Its unpredictability unsettled people's nerves, and jazz was wit expressed musically. Aileen didn't understand how such insulting words could ever have been set to music. Wasn't music the expression of love? They're funny, Cavan said, except maybe to people whose feet are too big. She shook her head, blotting out Cavan's vision. Nothing to see in the whole wide world but her haystack of crow-black hair. So you hate me because of my feet? Hate you? No. He could have said, I love you, but it was too soon for that. Your thick ankles are the reason I'm attracted to you, he tried instead. Mistake. Aileen flushed and rose from her deck chair. In her agitation, she seemed to tremble like the fronds of a palm tree in a storm. And your thick head's the very reason I'm attracted to you, she said, except that I'm not. He felt sorry for her, both on account of the clumsy unkindness of his words and the fear that showed in her eyes. Did she think he would strike her? She hadn't spoken about the chill northern archipelago where she'd grown up, but he guessed it was similar to here. The same befuddled men roaming peevishly from pub to pub, ready to raise a hand to any woman who dared to tease them. Thick head, they'd show her a thick fist if she wasn't careful. She made a sign for him to leave. He heaved himself up like an old man. She felt leaden herself, but the weight of his grief surprised her. This wasn't the end of the world. They barely knew each other. She watched him go, a man made heavy by what he'd brought on himself. Adam leaving the garden, she thought. She felt a pang for him and for men in general, no matter that some had raised their hands to her. A man turned from her, his back bent, ashamed, defeated, all the fight in him leaked away. Why was that a sight she felt she knew so well when she couldn't recall a single instance before today of having seen it? Alone again, Aileen Solomons looked at her feet.
Thank you.
So they are very much, there they are, they're a couple in love, but the way that they're in love and the way that they're not making it at this stage and the problems in wait for them are very much the problems of this world. She doesn't know, she's not used to jazz, she's living in a world where these things don't happen. This is a world that's afraid of wit. This is a world that's afraid of improvisation, and he's clumsy. He's been made clumsy by his parents. So they are both, if you like, the victims of whatever it is that's happened in this world.
But I find them a very attractive couple. I find their relationship mature and substantial. They're not sort of young romantics at all. And they have a lovely bantering way between them.
Yes, I love them actually. I think they are the nicest couple I've ever written about. And my American readers think that. Not all my English readers think that, but I don't know what that is. Maybe the Americans have retained their innocence. But I wanted to give them an innocence, so having them begin in the garden, as I joked, is not entirely without point. But part of the reason that they are relationally in the trouble that they are in is memory. Neither has a proper memory, and this is a novel about memory. Memory has been rooted out. And not only has memory been rooted out, but the tradition of natural discord has been rooted out. Because the people who've been got rid of in this world, the J people, were the natural, if to call them an enemies might be a strong way of putting it, but the natural antithesis of everybody else here. And a healthy society, it would seem to me, at any time, is one in which people are different, various, and they disagree. Get rid of the people with whom you disagree, and maybe the people with whom you disagree most, get rid of them, and you've got rid of the disagreement. And when you've got rid of disagreement, what are you left with? Agreement is, a society built upon agreement and consensus is a terrible world. And the only way you're going to get it is to stop people remembering the awful things that have happened. And we're in a world here, and I'm very interested in that, how we go about losing memory. And it's something I've written about in other novels, in Zoo Time too, the degree to which our culture, our internet, this is a long answer to your question, which was,
no,
I think you asked 3 years ago, this question. It's the degree to which our culture and our internet culture, but I won't go on about that, works against memory. I feel I'm living in a world in which people don't remember things.
I was fascinated by Port Reuben, as a seaside resort or a coastal town of some description. I particularly like the names you chose for some of the people who appear in Port Reuben and elsewhere in the novel. It strikes me as a kind of cross between Cold Comfort Farm and Fiddler on the Roof. They've got some wonderful names that you've dreamt up.
Well, what I've done is I've given everybody a kind of Celtic, sort of Celtic or even Nordic first name,
yes,
and then a very, very distinctly Jewish second name.
Yes.
So there's someone called Lowena Morgenstern and Ethel Weinstock and Densdale Kroplik, and a particular favourite one of mine is Rosenveen Fagenblatt. And this is partly the fun of writing that, but it's also a rather, this was me, the Jewish writer, this was I, the Jewish writer, having a kind of revenge, really, because Jewish history is full of Jews having to change their names, either because it's too dangerous to keep a Jewish name, or because they want to pass themselves off as not Jewish, in whichever world, in whichever German or English world they want to live in. So this was me reversing that vengefully, and instead of Jewish surnames being removed, they are given. This is one of the ways that this world that we're in thinks it might make peace with the past and not allow a catastrophe again. So if everybody's got a Jewish name, you don't know who the Jews are and you can't kill them again, except that there are none left anyway, are there, or are there? Mm. That's the thing, are there in fact some Jews in this world? There is I won't spoil the plot.
No. But if there is the garden which we heard about with your central couple meeting, there's also serpents in the garden, because there is also violent death in the novel, which you don't, or perhaps you do, you don't give us the whodunit and then tell us who done it. It's a kind of left unspoken and undelivered at the end of the novel.
Yeah, I don't do whodunits, and I don't read whodunits. And I'm never really interested in whodunit. Whenever I've tried to read a whodunit, I kind of know on the first page, and if I'm wrong, I kind of don't care really. So I'm not wildly interested in this, and I don't like reading about dead bodies much either, except in Shakespeare. I like dead in Shakespeare.
Yes,
and I'm always astonished at people who the people are who write the most, the bloodiest novels are often written by very gentle and quiet ladies who make cakes for country fairs, and then they go home and write at night, and they just fill their pages full of blood and corpses and things. And I could never do that. I remember I couldn't even have in my early novels, I couldn't let anybody die, because I thought I don't know enough. I don't know enough about what death looks like, or what it's like to feel bereaved. And it was only when my father died 20 years ago, anybody interested in doing research on me at the moment might note that and see that my work changes from that. I think it changes from that moment, because I dared be bleaker. It wasn't just that I felt bleaker, and we all know that when a parent dies, we feel that little bit more exposed to the world. Of course we do. But it's almost as if you feel you now have a right. I never felt I had a right to grief properly, or certainly to the knowledge of death properly. I couldn't just make that up. That felt wrong to me. Although writing is making up all the time, there are some things you have a right and some things you don't have a right to make up. So this is a novel that's got a lot more kind of death and blood and gore in
Yes.
it than mainly.
And is that why you introduced the theme of a sort of bloody death into the novel, to kind of reflect you felt you were almost not justified, but you could have qualified to do so?
Maybe, but bloody death was needed because this is a world in which people have lost their natural enemy. And it's sort of one of the things one of the ideas that's played within this book, that you have to have, it's a cruel thought, but philosophically a necessary thought. You have to have someone to understand yourself against, and even at some point, maybe even to hate. And when you hunt down those you hate, to the extent that your natural predator or those on whom you are naturally predacious has gone, then what do? Then you turn upon yourself. So for this novel to work, the people who are left, because this is not just when you wipe a people out, it's not just the tragedy of the people who are wiped out, it's your tragedy, because you've diminished yourself. You've diminished yourself to the extent that those you've wiped out may have made a contribution to your culture and your civilization, but you're diminished yourself to the extent that you no longer have that play with them. Hence, there's no wit. Mm-hmm. Hence, there's no syncopation, if you like, even in this world. So the violence has to be shown to be something that's visited by the people who are left upon themselves. And that also moves the story along because something has to be done about this. So, one or two people in high places decide somehow or other, these people that we have removed, we could do with them back. So that it's no longer ourselves that we hate and murder, but them, which is a pretty black conclusion. It's a very black book, actually.
I mean, have you worked out exactly how and why society has changed in this way, but kept it in your own imagination? Or have you actually, is there a sort of progress exactly, the development of this society? We compare it with our society and we see that there have been, profound changes. Have you worked out how these changes were affected?
Well, I mean, the book looks at them in various ways. It's culturally that I'm interested in, how what people read, how what people watch, how what people think changes. But we've got lots to go on. We have lots of world. I mean, the 20th century saw lots of genocides.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't just have Germany, but we've had things in African countries too. We've had things in the Congo. We know we've had Armenian genocide. We've had a lot of genocide, and we know the costs that societies pay. So there's nothing for me. There was nothing fantastic, although it was a bold leap for me to write a novel that speculated on these themes. It's not that much. It's not in the end that much of a leap for. It might be a small leap for me, but it's not a big leap for humanity to imagine this because we've done it. Not so very long ago, we have done it. I know one or two people reading this novel thought it's a bit unlikely that this is going to happen in this country. I think that's a crazy thing to say. I don't think anything is unlikely. I don't think any violence is unlikely. I mean, you can say it's less likely in some places than anywhere else, and I think the kind of violence I write about here probably is less likely on this island than it is in some other places you can think of. But to write anything off, no. I mean, and just to be more specific, it is a novel partly about anti-Semitism. I can't pretend it's not, and there has been anti-Semitism in this country. One doesn't feel a great deal of it now. In the usual places where you would expect to find it, you don't. But these things change and give themselves another name and another aspect. And one should never forget, although it's a long time ago, that England anyway was the first European country to throw Jews out. The first pogrom was England. England just cleared the Jews, massacred a number of them, and then cleared them out. And there were no Jews in this country for 400 years. So I think to imagine such a thing may be happening again doesn't mean that you think it's imminent and about to happen at any minute. But I think it's bonkers, not to suppose it could if this were right and if that were right and so on.
And the revolution, if that's what you call it, has been achieved very kind of sotto voce, hasn't it? Nobody, as I understand it, uses violence. It's more kind of social pressure that makes people conform to whatever it is the new orthodoxy in this new society.
Yes, but there's been violence. We're never quite sure what the nature of the violence was. what happened if it happened, so it's even questioned. So we're also in a world of denial, and denial of horror is a very important part of our society. Everything is denied. There've been Holocaust deniers from the moment there was a Holocaust, and there's subtle kinds of various kinds of denial. But once the denial sets in, there's then a lot of saying sorry. That's fashionable. Apologise. I apologise for becoming fashionable again in England at the moment. We're going to see a lot of saying sorry in the next 6 months from the Labour Party. I think, not that I'm here to talk about politics. We're going to get sorry for the Magna Carta, sorry for wherever it was, sorry for attacking the Spanish fleet in 1492, sorry if Shakespeare was rude to whoever Shakespeare. Just sorry. So an awful lot of sorry. So there's it could very well look that Jay is quite a very good parody, a very good satire on a situation which is about to evolve in England, and that would be fun. So that's one of the things that happens. You say sorry and you don't really know what you're saying sorry for, and that makes you feel better. But generally, what happens is things start to disappear. That's what that's the part of this I'm interested in. Whereas someone like Orwell was much more interested in how the day-to-day violence played out. I'm much more interested in it culturally. What do we lose? I'm very interested in that. What do you lose when you stop having an argument? What terrible thing happens when you win an argument? I love that in Shakespeare. When somebody scores a revenge in Shakespeare, our Phidias in Coriolanus is terrific. Our Phidias has been having this war with Coriolanus, and finally a bitter rivalry, and finally kills him, gets all his own warrior, and they kill Coriolanus. And that moment he goes, in a second, my rage is all forgot. And I love those moments. Remember the moment in Tosca when Tosca kills Scarpia, and she finally kills him. He's been trying to rape her, you remember, and she kills him, and then she looks, and there he is before this man. I've forgotten the Italian. All Rome trembled before this man, and look at it. When the emptiness of victory. I used to play table tennis very, very seriously, just to go from Tosca to table tennis, which I don't think anybody's ever done before.
It's another first.
And however bitter I used to feel when I lost, and I lost a lot, I would go, I played competitively, and I'd go home at night and kind of lie in bed and think, life has got no meaning. But then when I won, and I'd come home with a little cup, and I'd show my parents, and they'd say, that's very, very nice, dear, and put it on the mantelpiece. And then I'd wake up the next morning, and I'd look at the cup and think, well, what's that for? Victory can actually be more desolating than defeat.
Defeat, yeah.
Because there's nothing you can do after victory, whereas defeat you can say, I will get my revenge. But when you get your revenge...
Exactly, where are the ashes of victory, perhaps?
Yes.
Do you feel, is it the business of writers to address whatever themes they feel able to deal artistically with? Is it part of the job spec, would you say?
Job spec to do what you want. There isn't one. You do what you want. There are etiquettes, and that's to do with you and your aesthetic and your sense of art. But there are no rules about what you can and what you can't do. You can't do what's false to you. Really, that's all you can say. Your heart has to be in it, and you have to work. It's writing, and you have to work. It has to be in the writing. That which is not in the writing is not there. There's no point in going to writing with a good attitude. Your attitudes are irrelevant. What you believe is irrelevant. I'm doing a lot of work on Shakespeare at the moment because I've just done, this is to whet your appetite for next year, I've just done a version of The Merchant of Venice, which will be out next year,
yeah,
which will be called Shylock Is My Name. And I've had a chance to immerse myself in Shakespeare again, as I used to before I was a writer, when I was an academic, and I loved teaching Shakespeare. And Shakespeare is so fantastic in every way. But he is the greatest of all writers in this sense too, that he is a lesson to all writers about what writing is about, and that it's about writing. You cannot say what Shakespeare believed. You cannot say what Shakespeare stood for. You can say what it is that, at this particular moment and in this particular scene, he seems to prefer this to that. But you never feel with Shakespeare that there's any kind of dogma, any kind of credo. There's nothing. There is just the writing, and the writing as a means of investigating what it's like to be a person, what a person is like, and that's.
And I think that's particularly appropriate to that play, that what you just said, that you are all the time guessing as to what, which I find Shakespeare thinks of Shylock, thinks of Antonia, and the whole other characters. So is this going to be performed, you hope? I mean, there's a definite...
It's a novel.
It's right, oh, I see.
It's a novel. It's a novel. Yes, I mean, and what he thinks of Shylock, I mean, the whole argument, is it an anti-Semitic play, is it not an anti-Semitic play, it's so crude. What he thinks about Shylock is I don't know whether he thought anything about Shylock before he invented him. There was a Shylock invented in some other story. Shakespeare always took other people's stories, so I enjoyed taking one from Shakespeare. It's nice to do that. It saves you a lot of bother.
Yes, quite.
But he didn't know what his Shakespeare was until he... I mean, this is the great thing about writing. To this degree and this degree only am I like Shakespeare, I believe. And I'm sure it would have been like him. I'm sure he would have... All the evidence is that it was like this for him too, as it is for me, that you don't know what it is that you think until you write it. Mm-hmm. And if you do know what it is that you think, and then you write what it is that you think, you will not write well. That is why I never believe if a writer tells me he's a political writer, between ourselves, I don't think he or she can be a very good writer. You shouldn't have a politics if you're a writer. Your characters can have politics, and the novel can investigate the politics by juxtaposition, views, and so on. But to actually express a politics or a theology, the greatest writers don't do. You find your way in, and only when you start writing do you know what it is that you mean, do you know what it is that you think, and I bet he was surprised. But I bet he was surprised by his Shylock.
Yes, I've had a couple of writers have said something similar to me, that they write to find out what they think, or even what questions they should be asking.
Well, exactly, and you don't know what. I had no idea what was going to happen to this couple. I had no idea. I mean, I saw this. The novel begins with Aileen swinging her feet, and she's looking at her feet and thinking her feet are big and her feet are ugly. And this then led me to actually... I can't now remember whether I heard him singing the Fats Waller song, Your Feet's Too Big, or I saw her big feet first. But what her big feet are doing there, I absolutely couldn't tell you. But it just somehow or other, everything then, well, yeah, that's that song. You couldn't sing that song in this kind of a culture. The joke of your feet's too big. Way down in Harlem at a table for two, there were three of us, me, your big feet, and you. It's great. But it's a music of a particular time when you could be rude in a very sophisticated way. And what if we're living in a world where you can't be rude? And one thing then leads to another, and the next thing you're thinking about Fats Waller, and you're thinking about music that's rude and music that's not rude, and through that way you start to create a world. But it's all done through the language of you imagine. If you were a writer, you imagine, because you're a writer and not a painter, you imagine through language, and it's only through language that you have your meaning.
Anyway, I think it's high time we had some questions from our audience. So, who's going to be the first to put a question? Hands up, please. Well, here we are. Good. Here comes the microphone, I hope. I'd like to keep your hand up, please.
Hi, Howard. I thought I might have a bit more time to kind of frame this question in my mind, but I'll just sort of blurt it out.
Do you want to come back to it then?
Well, nobody else is asking.
Do you want to come back to it next year?
I guess my question is that the world is not short of places, countries where there have been appalling things happen and a collective amnesia has set in. The Holocaust is something that is particularly difficult in our times and in our culture. I wonder if, my thinking, so I'm checking this out with you, is that for Jews, as well as for the surrounding world, that there is a bit of a challenge in terms of seeing something like the Holocaust as both specific and as universal in terms of its application. I think that probably attention to collective amnesia was kicked in to play in Germany some decades after the Holocaust. And I suspect that Germany was the first country actually to start waking up and then to kind of having this experience of we maybe do need to think collectively about our own collective amnesia and what happened. Because I suspect that some of these other issues around other genocides have actually followed on by then. It's just a theory, but if you get the general drift of my question.
Do you know I don't? I really want to.
Okay, the question is both specific and universal, and whether that is a particular difficulty for Jews. I think it may be.
What's a particular difficulty for Jews?
Confronting something like the Holocaust and seeing that it has both a specific message and a wider message.
Yes. And to be, well, for anybody, because the Holocaust was not just a Jewish event, it was an everybody event. For everybody, you have to find a path through thinking this just happened at a particular time for other particular people, and therefore it's got no applicability beyond it. But you have to find a path between that and thinking, oh, this just means that the world is waiting to kill Jews or somebody else every minute. Both those are extreme positions that seem to me don't give you the truth. It was a particular thing committed at a particular time in the history of a particular people. Though when there was historical speculation that something like this might happen, Germany was not the country they thought it was going to happen in. Historians of the late 19th century and earlier 20th century thought something like this was going to happen in France. And then after France, Austria. Well, Austria and Germany are quite close. So there is some historian surprise that it happened in Germany when it did, but we don't want to get into that one. But there is reason for a Jew or any minority person to believe that he has been a problem for host cultures, if you like to put it that way, for a long. A Jew has been a problem to other beliefs, to other belief systems for a long time. A Jew has been a problem to Christians since Christianity, and that is to do with the fact that Christianity is born out of Judaism. So the problem between Christian and Jews is not located in Germany. It's located in the church, which was originally a Jewish church. So there is a kind of civil war at the beginning, a civil war of ideas at the beginning, which has never healed. So I think it's fair to go on thinking that the Jew represents, for many people, an other, a kind of eternal other. There's some Jews who think it's not helpful to think like that, but it is how I think. I do think about the idea of an eternal other that's necessary for people to define themselves, for the Christian to define himself. Certainly at the time Shakespeare was working, if you read Shakespeare and scholars, they talk about the way, although there were no Jews there for Shakespeare to meet or talk about, only a handful. When Shakespeare wrote Shylock, he wouldn't have met any Jews, but the Jew was nonetheless an inflammatory idea in the imaginations of Elizabethans. Why? There'd been no Jews in England for 400 years. What are Jews figuring so largely in the Elizabethan imagination for? And there are lots of very good historians who put their minds to that.
Thank you very much. Yes, hand up here.
Yeah, Howard, I wanted to ask you about self-censorship, which seems to be something that you're playing with in your new novel. And I mean, I tend to agree with you that 1984 wasn't a great novel, but...
1984 wasn't a great novel.
No, it wasn't a great novel, but one interesting idea in it was that, Winston Smith was a censor and also self-censor, and it was only really when he began to overcome that with Julia that he opened up as a person, and didn't end well, as we know. But there seems to be a kind of self-censorship which is going on in society today. And I see it in things like Facebook, where liberal, professional, educated people are very nice above the surface. And then if you read the comments section on a newspaper or anywhere else, there's this hideous stuff goes on beneath the surface. And I wonder if the two are related. So my question is, do you see that self-censorship as a very modern phenomenon that has risks both for literature and for society?
Self-censorship itself, which doesn't call itself censorship, which is a feature of our time, and which we use phrases like political correctness or something or other, does seem to me to be a terrible danger. And it might be that the violence that we see underneath, you'll see a polite column written in a newspaper when someone's being very careful. I suppose that's censorship. Very careful what they say about Jews, blacks, gays, whatever you like. Very careful. And then the filth underneath. It's as if the filth underneath is a kind of necessary reminder of what's going on in the cellarage, that we're being very, very careful about how we talk about things. And all the while underneath it's barbaric. But we don't want to be barbaric ourselves just because they are. So we naturally, a little bit of self-censorship. A little bit of self-censorship if it means that when we wake up when a writer wakes up in a filthy mood in the morning, he doesn't use his powers as a writer to express that filthy mood. Or that he measures. The censorship I'm aware of is always aesthetic. If it doesn't look good, if it produces a bad sentence, I'm not going to say it. Beyond that, I'm not aware of any other kind. I am worried about that violence, though. What is that violence that's going on? There's bits here I could have read. Well, the little bit I read here about men wandering, about Aileen, about Cavan being worried that Aileen is frightened that he might hit her because where she's come from, men are wandering around, befuddled men are wandering around from pub to pub hitting women. Well, there's quite a bit of it still going on. It is amazing to me that there is still, in our apparently respectable age in which we've washed ourselves clean, and you can't be, you can't even a poet can't say anything that might be adduced as misogynistic without everybody piling in on him. An elderly poet admires a woman's figure at an airport, and this is misogynistic. While out there in the actual world of non-poets, men are going around and visiting as much violence on women as they ever did, or maybe, or certainly as much anyway. There is an odd disconnect here. And it does bother me that violence would bother us all, that we think we've cleaned our society up, and we haven't. There is still violence from men to women. There is still racial violence. There is still anti-Semitism. Part of the impulse for a book like this, a natural thing for a Jew to feel, I would have thought, is that how come after the Holocaust you can still find people wandering around carrying banners saying death to Jews and Hamas, Hamas, Jews to the gas, and still, given what else you can say, there's nothing to do with how you might feel politically about this and that, but still people have to carry a banner saying Hitler was right. What? So are we anywhere, in fact? Or are we, in fact, is your question another way of saying we're papering over the cracks? And in fact, political correctness is dangerous not only because first and foremost, because it looks as though, it's making us look as though we've improved in the way we behave to one another, and it would appear that we haven't. The rats are making as much noise as ever, maybe more.
Thank you. Yes, gentleman here. Here comes a mic.
This is very brief, and I could be wrong, but I can't quite believe what you said. I mean, I'm sure.
Which bit?
Well,
I've said a few things.
Violent anti-Semitism now, I'm sure it exists, but it's surely much less than it was. Well, certainly racial feelings when I was young. I was much more conscious of the quantity. It might be very intense, but just my whole experience is it is less, or do you think I'm just censoring?
I don't know if it's more or less, and if you're talking about what was going around Europe in the 20s and 30s, it certainly is, and it certainly isn't expressed like that. And I certainly do not say I walk around the streets as a Jew in fear of violence. But one of the things that's changed, as many a Jewish thinker will tell you, is that what's changed is, and this is to do with this gentleman's question too, we have censored ourselves to the degree that no one would now proudly call himself a hater of Jews. It is not done to hate Jews. In the 20s you could say you hate Jews. It was fine. You cannot now say you can hate Jews. There's another way round it, however. There are other things you can say instead of I hate Jews. And there are other ways in which you can manifest that hatred.
Does that mean there are masses of people out there who
I don't know. If there are masses, I don't know. No, I don't think there are masses. But what might happen to make there be masses of people? And certainly when the Middle East flares up, then there are a lot more people who want to, but they don't want to make a political point. They want to make an old racial point. That's what I'm saying. Why is that old racial point still there? The fact that anybody should want to say Jews to the gas still, it's only 60 years ago. I was born. The gas ovens were, I didn't see it, I wasn't touched by it personally, I can't claim anything, but I was alive when that was happening. So it's not that long ago. I am elderly, but it's not that long ago. So in our time, you would have thought, surely that one's had it. And the same when you read about violence to women, surely we've dealt with that now, the violence, surely that's dealt with. And I can't tell you, if you said to me there's not as much violence to women now as there was in the 18th century, I wouldn't know, maybe there isn't. The real problem is that there's any.
Thank you. Now, hand up at the back here.
A bit of a change of view. I was just interested. You spoke about having been an academic, and then you were speaking about you're not planning your novel. Your novel emerges and evolves as you work through the process of writing itself. And I'm interested in how did that change of view come? Because I think of the academic being much more towards what goes on in the head rather than what comes out, from the, if you like, the unconscious awareness.
Maybe I wasn't a very good academic. And it's certainly the case that when I tried in my 20s to be a writer, because I wanted to be a novelist, not a writer, a novelist. Novelists were things I revered as a little boy. Novels I revered. I had pictures. I had a picture of George Eliot and Jane Austen on my bedroom wall. You may have heard me say this before. My father thought I was very strange indeed. And that was all I ever wanted to be. And then, I didn't write at university for some reasons, and then I had to have a job. So a job teaching English literature seemed a good one. But I was very academic-ish. There was an academic-ish part of me at that. And when I tried to write novels, I wrote academic novels, in an academic mode. And they were terrible. I never wrote one. I never got beyond 3 pages. Even I could see that they were dead. And it was more or less when my career as an academic was over, and it came to its end in Wolverhampton Polytechnic sometime in the late 70s, that I wrote a novel then, the only novel I ever wrote, which was my first novel to get published, which was called Coming From Behind, and it was a kind of a comic elegy to my academic life, in a way, but it was not written in an academic manner. I felt so, finished and washed up as an academic, well, as anything, to tell you the truth. I was in my mid-30s and in a panic. I'd not written anything. And my father, who'd laughed at me for having photographs of pictures of Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte and George Eliot on the wall, used to say to me whenever I said, "So where's this novel of yours then? So where's this?" Taunting me with the novel I'd never written. And I thought, unless I write a novel, I will throw myself into whatever canal it was that ran through the middle of Wolverhampton. The Wolverhampton Canal, I suppose it was called. And it was only by letting go, really, and realizing I have to write in another language. I have to write in the language of men, not in the language of academics. But I still like a little bit of speculation in my novels. I still enjoy. There are moments when novelists speculate. You often say, show, don't tell. That's the great thing with anybody who goes to writing school is told, show, don't tell. Well, it's right, but telling can be quite nice sometimes. I love a little bit of George Eliot speculating in the middle. I like it. When George Eliot preaches to me, I like it. When a preacher of that quality preaches to me, it's good. And when a novelist preaches, it's slightly different, because it's not abstract thought. It's thought that's grown out of the tangible practicalities of the novel itself. So I love that. And I'm not above doing a little bit of novelist preaching myself, as you may have noticed.
I think we have time for one last question.
This gentleman's had his hand up.
Yes, gentleman down here in the second row.
Could I return to political correctness? I think there's an acceptance that political correctness...
Excuse me, sir, could you put the mic to your... That's perfect, yeah.
Okay, good. I think there's a general acceptance that political correctness obviously is putting a veil over a reality as you were describing. Do you not think, though, that ideas of what is correct can have a positive influence, that they set norms that become inculcated in society? They may equally, depending on who's making them, create a negative reaction, and there is quite a lot of negative reaction against political correctness, largely, I think, because of who is seen to be espousing these ideas. You seem to kind of see it as a neutral
I agree
idea.
with you that sometimes society has to say it wants to change the way people think about things, and changing the words that we use and showing that some words carry an unbearable burden of prejudice and hatred is quite right. The N word that we would have used, and even the J word used in a particular way. You would say the way people, that the anti-Semitism is not now what it was then, and it might be because, we know we can't now say dirty Jew or something. When I was at school, people used the word Jew as a verb. You Jewed me. You Jewed me means that you cheated me, you robbed me, and that word has become unacceptable, and that's a very good thing. But what you can't have when it comes to the making of art or the writing of books, if you don't want me to be fancy, is anyone saying there's a subject you can't address or there's a way you can't. I mean, let's have political correctness. To correct things, and let's have an argument about it, and let's have people not being politically correct. And the whole point of art, the whole justification for art, for the thing I do, for the thing that you all come here and venerate and probably do yourself, the whole reason for literature is literature is in another sphere. It's ideology free, it questions ideology, it opens up our minds, and this novel is very much about this, that you have to be in an argument. And the minute someone says, you can't say that, it's the end of an argument. Yes, say you can't say that, but accept the fact that someone is going to come along and say, oh yes, you can. And when you're living in a society in which you can't say something and that's the end of it, it's a finished society. The healthiest society, the only society worth living in, is the one in which we are all in constant turmoil of argument about everything. It's the closing of the mind that's the most terrifying thing that happens to a society. And the wonderful thing about art is art will open the mind. Art opens the mind and the imagination, and it's the speech of freedom. That sounds like a closing oratory. It's got a ring.
I was going to say thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Howard will be signing copies of his books next door in the signing area, which is out that door, turn left and left again. I was going to say, Howard, it's been one of the most stimulating hours I've ever spent in these halls, and I love the way you've taken us from the canals of Venice and the Rialto to the canals of Wolverhampton Polytechnic. So,
and you've been working on that one.
The last 5 seconds or so. Yes. Ladies, I'm going to ask you again, let's thank Howard Jacobson.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great pleasure.